Okay, so here's the basic background that you need in order to understand the Sugi of Tzroros, and in particular, Rava's Chakira and Daf Yud Chesam and Aleph. We know that we talk about the differences between tam and muad. And what we say is that when an animal damages in an abnormal way, we say it's a tam to damage that way. So let's say, the classic example, of course, is an ox goring. So goring for an ox is considered abnormal behavior. So if it does that once, that's abnormal, that would be tam. But if it keeps doing that a bunch of times, it becomes a muad, it becomes normal behavior. So for the tam, for when it's an animal's tam, it damages in an abnormal way, we would say that that's lav orche. It's not its way, it's not normal behavior. But if the animal does that a bunch more times, it becomes orche, it becomes normal behavior. Now, the truth is, though, when we talk about muad can really be one of two flavors. It can either be something that was an innate characteristic. So, for example, let's say it's damaging. Let's say you bring a dog into the supermarket and it starts eating the strawberries out of the bins. So that is considered normal behavior. It's never done that before. The answer is, but you can anticipate that. That's normal behavior for the animal to eat food that is suited for it. So that would be an innate characteristic, which the Gemara refers to as muad mitchilaso. It was always that way. It's always expected to behave that way. And so the classic examples for that might be either shein, when it damages in order to get hana, or regel, when it bumps into things, if it bumps in with its feet, or bumps in with its body parts, or things that are on its body. Those are classic examples of muad mitchilaso. But then the other kind is when it's an established behavioral pattern. In other words, it wasn't always that way. It started off as something that's abnormal. So, for example, if you would have Karen that it does 3 times, becoming a muad, so when an animal gores 3 times, now it becomes a muad. If it's a muad, now it's normal behavior. But Karen originally is the classic example for tam, that it's abnormal behavior. Now, if it does it a bunch more times, now it becomes a muad. That becomes normal behavior for it. Now, what are the major differences between tam and muad, other than how the damage has occurred? In other words, as a result of typical behavior or atypical behavior. So that's really the Gemara in Baba Kama and Daf Tazayin. So we know from the Gemara, Baba Kama Daf Tazayin, so we know that Mishnah over there, and Tazayin Beis tells us that there's 2 major distinctions between tam and muad. Number one, and this is in terms of their payment. Number one is with respect to how much you pay. So for muad, we know that you pay nezek shalim, and for tam, we know that you pay chatzi nezek. You pay only half damages. That's number one, is with respect to how much you pay. Number 2 is with respect to from what you pay. Meaning to say that when we're dealing with muad, we know that when you're paying the nezek shalim, let's say you're paying from land, you would pay me'aliyah. You pay from the very best stuff that you have. Mashenke, when it's tam, you pay megufo. You pay from its body. What does it mean that you pay from its body? So let's say, for example, the mazik's animal is worth $200. And the nizik's animal is worth $1,000. So now, if the mazik's animal kills the nizik, and let's say, just for simplicity's sake, it makes the animal worth $0. So it totally kills the animal. Now it's worth $0. And how did it kill it? It killed it by goring it in an atypical way. It's Karen. It's never done this before. Now it kills the animal. How much do you have to pay? So you'll tell me, you have to pay chatzi nezek. Well, how much is chatzi nezek? Well, the animal started out as $1,000. Now it's worth $0. So chatzi nezek would be $500. That's what you would say. But the answer is no, that's not really true. When you're paying megufo means that you got maxed out at the value of the mazik's guf. And so since the mazik's guf was worth $200, that's how much you're going to pay. That's what it means to pay megufo. Okay, so now to put it all together then, what this means is that there's 3 major differences to keep in mind when we're talking about the differences between tam and muad. Number 1 is that tam is typically lav orche, while muad is orche. It's, in other words, it's atypical for a tam versus typical behavior from muad. Number 2 is with respect to how much you pay. So for tam you pay chatzi nezek, for muad you pay nezek shalim. And number 3 is with respect to from what you pay. For tam you're going to pay megufo, and for muad you're going to pay me'aliyah. Okay, those are the major distinctions between tam and muad. Number 1, orche for muad, lav orche for tam. Number 2, nezek shalim for muad, chati nezek for tam. And number 3, me'aliyah for muad and megufo for tam. Okay, so now this leads us to Rava's chakira. Not quite, but 1 second. So this leads us to the machlokas between Sumchis and the Chachamim. What's the machlokas? So we know that if you open up the second parak of Baba Kama, the sugya starts with the topic of regel. After we talk about regel, now what is regel? Regel is, first of all, you should remember, regel is orche. It's typical behavior of the animal. The animal is damaging by bumping into things as it's walking in this typical way. It's, of course, not Bershus Ram. We know that Regel Bershus Ram is Pater. We're talking about Bershus and Nizik. You're in the Nizik's backyard, let's say, and it's walking around and bumping into things. So now when it's bumping into things, that would be Regel, and how much would you have to pay? Well, that's Orche. If it's Orche, normal behavior, so what would that be? That would be Muad, so you'd have to pay Nezek Shalim. So the Gemara then segues, though, we bring up a Bryce, and the Bryce segues into a topic about Tzroros. So what is Tzroros? So the case of Tzroros typically is that, let's say, an animal is walking along in a normal fashion, and as it's walking, a stone gets flicked out from beneath its foot and goes flying and crashes a glass vase. That's the case of Tzroros. So Tzroros is a function of regel. So now, in that case of Tzroros, what are you going to have to pay? So that is the machlokas between Sumchis and the Chachamim. According to Sumchis, you're going to have to pay Nezek Shalim. While according to the Chachamim, how much are you going to have to pay? You're going to have to pay Chati Nezek. Now the question is, though, which one is more intuitive? So you'll tell me, well, wait a second. Let's think about this. It's a function of regel. It's a function of orche, of normal behavior. If it's a function of normal behavior, if the case of Tzroros is a function of normal behavior, so Sumchis makes a lot of sense. Of course you should pay Nezek Shalim, just like any other case of Muad, where it's orche, and you're going to have to pay Nezek Shalim, so it makes a lot of sense that when we're dealing with Tzroros, you're going to have to pay Nezek Shalim. However, the Chachamim say that no, in the case of Tzroros, you're not going to pay Nezek Shalim, you're going to pay Chati Nezek. And that seems to be a little bit perplexing. How could it be that in the case of Orche, you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek? And what the Gemara basically says, Rava tries to look for, originally in Daf Yitzayin Beis, Rava looks for the Nekudas Machlokas, and he says, look, it boils down to Halacha Moshe Sinai. According to the Chachamim, Chatzi Nezek is something that we'll learn from Halacha Moshe Sinai. But either way, that is the famous Machlokas between Sumchis and the Chachamim. So when, according to Sumchis, for a case of Tzroros, you're going to pay Nezek Shalim. According to the Chamim, you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek. Now here's where we get to Rava's Chakira. Rava says as follows. Rava says, let me see if I can get this straight. What about, we know that there are always three things we have to consider. For time versus mood, we said, number one, how did it occur? Is it orche, is it lav orche? Number two, how much are you going to pay? Chatzi nezek, nezek sham. Number three, from what you're paying, meguf for me aliyah. So I know that this is a case of orche, so that's how it occurred. And I know that according to some, because you pay nezek sham, and according to the cham, you pay chatzi nezek. The question then is, what about the question of from what? From what do you pay? Are you going to pay megufo or me'aliyah? So now here's the thought process, though. According to Sumchis says it's a case of orche. You're going to pay nezek shalim. So when we say from what do you pay? What's that going to be? The answer is going to be pretty obvious. You're going to pay me'aliyah, just like any other case of orche of muad. You're going to pay me'aliyah. But what about according to the chachamim? According to the chachamim, on the one hand, when we're dealing with the case of Tzroros, it's a case of orche. Well, wait a second. If it's a case of orche, then what would you say to pay when we're dealing with the question of from what? What would you pay? So you'd say, oh, well, if it's orche, then obviously you should pay me'aliyah. But then you'll say, well, wait a second, though. We know that according to the Chachamim, you pay chatzi nezek. But if you pay chatzi nezek is associated with tam. But if chatzi nezek is associated with tam, then maybe the from what should also be like tam. And therefore you should pay megufo. So those are the two competing characteristics of Tzroros. On the one hand, we're saying that for Tzroros, it's a function of orche, right? It's a told of regel. Tzroros is something that as the foot is just walking around, as animals walking around, a stone gets flicked out and goes flying and breaks a glass vase. So it's normal behavior. So maybe it should be me'aliyah. The from what should be me'aliyah. On the other hand, you say no. As a function of chatzi nezek, we know the chatzi nezek is associated with tam. If it's associated with tam, then what should you have to pay? You should have to pay megufo. That is Rava's Chakira. when according to the Chum, according to Sumchas, it's obvious. According to Sumchas, we would know right away. It's a case of Orcha, you pay Nezek Shalim, so of course you're going to pay Me'aliyah. But what about according to the Chum? According to the Chumim, are you going to pay, we know that you pay Chatzin Nezek, so when we say from what do you pay, are you going to pay Megufo, like any other case of